All right, welcome back to Becky Amio horse training and ride number 20 on LR Blue Ambrose. Since our last ride, we've had about 5 days off, and we did not get the weather we were expecting. It got real cold, but we didn't get the snowfall we were expecting, so the arena is still in pretty good shape. There are some hard spots out there, but he's just going to have to get used to it and be okay with it. You know, in his lifetime, he's not going to have the most perfect ground to ride in, and he's going to have to get good at handling himself in any condition, and that's going to make him a better horse long term. Today, the temperature is, it says it's 38, but I'm really not buying it. I'm really regretting my decision not to wear a neck gaiter, a fleece neck gaiter today. It says the feels like it's 29, and the wind's blowing 16 miles per hour out of the north. And you know, today I did give this colt a really nice warm-up, so mentally he ought to be really good today, and physically he ought to be good and stretched out and prepared to go to work. So today is going to be a little bit more of a wrap-up of everything that we've worked on so far before he goes and gets turned out. So keep on watching, and let's get after it. When an owner comes and picks up their colt from me, I usually put on one last ride for them to show them how their colt is working before they take them home. Sometimes an owner will get on a colt and ride it, sometimes they don't. Just depends on the situation and the horse. But what I'm going to do in this ride today is almost identical to what I will do for a client when they come to pick up their horse. And if their horse needs warm up before I start, I will show them their horse warming up before I get on to ride. So I want to be very transparent in my training and how I've treated this horse up to this point and how it's worked for me. And I want to let them know of any instances where I had any sort of issue or not, or glitch in their training, if you will, because I don't ever want them to go home and go, oh my gosh, he did this. Did he ever do that with you? And so I like to be able to answer all those questions. When I made the decision to go to 20 rides, it was a general number. It was a good round figure. You know, a lot of colts don't even make it to 20 rides. There's a lot that only get to 30 rides. It depends on the individual, and if I was riding a teeny tiny 2-year-old, there was a couple fillies particularly this year that I rode that were teeny tiny 2-year-olds, and they only got about 10 rides. They got the groundwork portion, and they got about 10 rides, and they were going to go right home, get turned out, and they're coming back to me this spring. If this guy was a 3-year-old, he would certainly have gone to 30 to 45 to 50 rides, and I would have worked him a whole lot harder. You have to treat them all as individuals. But I start to feel it early on when they're ready to be done, when they're tired, and they reach a point where they just kind of plateau, and you could be putting a bunch of feed into them and giving them the rest that they need, and they're still plateauing on you. And that's when it's time for them to go home and be turned out, or go home and work with their owner, and the owner enjoy them and ride them a couple of times a week, and just kind of get some new scenery, because this is really intense what we're doing here with them. They're in a small corral. They're taken out of the pasture, moved into a small corral. There's neighbors. They're in a program where they work consistently. They have to be tied up and stand there. They have to be saddled and stood tied, you know, in all this different temperature, all this different weather. So, you know, it's very stressful on a colt to put them into training, I really think. And this is just an evaluation for his mental capacity from here on. I have one client that she's just looking to see if they're going to be reasonable in that first 30 days. She just wants to know if they're going to be reasonable, and if they're worth going further on with. And so that's what I've kind of taken that perspective into all the colts that I start is it worth it to go further with this horse? Because in the horse's lifetime, think how much you spend on your horse's feed, his grooming supplies, his tack, his blanket, his supplements, whatever. I mean, I'm speaking from a personal point of view. I don't want to invest a bunch of money into a horse that is unreasonable to deal with. There are so many good ones out there to work with. Why keep on trying on the one that doesn't want to be compliant? And this colt has really shown me in this last couple of months of riding that he's going to work out wonderfully for Lowing Ranch. He's going to work out for a long time as a good using horse, and I think he's going to make a wonderful stallion prospect. And I think you can see how he's riding here, how valuable that warm-up is to them. Anytime you have an opportunity to warm your horse up on the ground first before you get on is good for them. Mentally, physically, emotionally. You know, I've been in a position where I've been made fun of for warming up my horse before I got on, for lunging or for round penning or whatever it is that I did. And I was told, you just need to be able to get on him and go. Well, look at how much better they work for you when you've had that little bit of groundwork time to make sure their mind is right, their body's warmed up, they're stretched out properly. You know, you have that bonding moment with them on the ground, because remember, you are riding the same horse that you lead. So we're seeing a ginormous improvement, or at least I can tell you, I remember the huge improvement that he had physically and mentally when I rode him this last day after I gave him that really good warm-up that I did. Because there were several days there where I just jumped on him and rode him because I was trying to evaluate him as an individual. You know, was he gonna break in two on me? Was he gonna be super fresh? Was I gonna have to ride him down? And, you know, after doing this really nice warm-up with him and having him ride this good for me, you know, it tells me a lot about him. And I think it's further proof that all of our horses would benefit from a solid warm-up on the ground first. It's really hard to look back at previous rides and think how difficult these inside rolls were for him. He's gotten so proficient at these inside rolls. You know, I had somebody say to me one time, well, when are you ever going to need an inside roll out the opposite lead? Well, there are lots of things you need an inside roll out the opposite lead for. Number one, your top and bottom turn and pulls, your first turn and barrels, and then whenever you're working a cow, whether it's out in the pasture or on the fence line, you don't roll back. You are usually on the lead going the direction towards the cow, and then when you stop the cow on the fence, roll with it. It's actually an inside roll, and you pick up the opposite lead going on the fence. Even though mentally that may not seem right in your head, you know, how we've been working it here is he'll be going to the right, we stop, inside roll right, and then go left and pick up left lead. Now, if you're working a cow on the fence, it's just going to be opposite of that. At least that's the way that they would work it most efficiently. Anytime they can go the direction and turn the direction they need to turn, and they're on the correct lead, and they don't have to switch the lead before the turn, because they need a minimum of 3 strides to make that turn, to shut down and make that turn before they make the turn. That's getting pretty technical there, and you know, that might be better explained on a more advanced horse than him. But if you guys have any questions, you know, drop me a message, send me an email or something. I would love to show you this. Come spring, I want to be able to show you that technique on a more advanced horse that's done it more. And we don't necessarily need a cow or anything. I can just show you. It has to do with working a false lead. and doing a flying lead change from a false lead. Like I said, it's a lot more technical and advanced than where this colt is at in his training right now. One of the reasons for asking him to disengage that hind end and move it over like that in that particular position there is to set up for when I ask him to start loping. Because in the lope or the canter gait, they drive from the hind end. And to pick up the correct lead, they have to have their hip to the inside. So gaining control of the hind end in that regard is going to help me work on his lope departure and picking up the correct lead long term. So whenever I ask him for a lead, I'm going to push his hip over first before I ask him to elevate himself and go into the lope from a walk or from a trot or from a standstill or a backup. When we do take the lope departure here, he takes off pretty speedy on me, and he's kind of zoomy at first, and that's okay. He levels out and he kind of collects himself on his own. In the future, what I'll do to correct this is I'll work trot to lope transitions or walk to lope transitions, and that will fix that problem in a hurry. And also just by loping him more is going to help that issue right there. You know, up to this point, I don't lope a ton of laps. You know, I'm not sitting here loping 20 circles both directions. It's a handful of circles, and then we move on to the next technique. And by just bringing him down to a smaller circle, that helps slow him down and decelerate. And right here, I'm just setting him up for a stop. And he has one of the most beautiful rollaway into a lope transition that he's had. That is textbook right there. That's what we're working towards. And the only way to improve on that is by loping down, come to a stop, and rolling out of it as hard and fast as you can. But again, that's a little bit more advanced move. You know, maybe by 60 rides, this guy will be really getting after it and doing that. So again, here I use my small trot circle to decelerate, to bring him to a stop, and prepare him to roll away again and take his left lead. And this tiny bit of hesitation here coming out, where we had to trot a few strides before we loped off, I distinctly remember that being my fault. I didn't ask for it. He was willing to give it to me, and I just didn't have the nerve to ask him for it. And it happens, and then you know, you go a few strides and you can break back down to a trot, and this is teaching him to get really quiet. So lots of acceleration and deceleration is really going to keep them mentally and emotionally sound long term. He's playing game over really nice, long loose rein, really wants to stretch down, stay really quiet. Got a pretty nice back up here and turned it into a turn on the haunches, just a quarter turn. You know, it's enough. He did it correctly. And you know, I didn't do any flying lead changes this ride. I felt like I had done enough of them and he had been starting to anticipate them, so I wanted to eliminate the anticipation and just not practice them for a while. I'm going to readdress them when I get back on him in the spring, but for now I think it was good enough, and the fact that I have it on video that we did it, you know, that's good enough for me. Right here I'm going to put him in a 360 and you can see how he kind of wanted to jump out of it right there. And that's because we've been coming out of the rolls and going right into a lope and going pretty fast. So they start to anticipate a little bit, and now he has to learn that he needs to wait for me and pay attention, because sometimes it's not just an inside roll out the opposite lead. Sometimes it's a 360. So that time was better. I had his attention a little bit more that time around, and always try to come out of it a little bit faster gait than what you went into it. And that'll help speed up the footwork in the turn. So here's a perfect example of him cheating me and doing it wrong. And see how that hind end moved? And so I'm going to correct it right here. Quick correction. Put that hip back in place. And then ask for it again. And it happens again right here. This time you can see my correction a little bit more. I get a lot more aggressive with that leg, kicking his hip back over, making him be correct. And then again, I'm just going to ask for it again. So I didn't have to jerk on his face. I didn't have to thump on him too bad. I had to remind him, you got to move that hip over. And it's all about the release. As soon as he moves the hip over and understands that that's what I want, I release. I just realized here that what might be hard for you to wrap your head around is that we teach him to move the hip over, yet in this maneuver we want the hip to stay still. And sometimes that's a little bit difficult, but when we're asking the hip to stay still, we're just holding that leg on them to keep it there in place as we bring the front end around with our hands. I hope that helps you understand it a little bit better. So I'm going to start asking him for the 360 to the right, and like an inside roll, he thinks he wants to take off the other direction. I have to hold him, back him off, and continue to roll him. I actually find it easier to teach the 360 first before the inside roll out the opposite lead, because then you don't get as much anticipation. Set him up again. And he's wanting to walk out of it. You just have to hold with your hands and remind him to back off your bit, rock back on his haunches, and continue to roll. And always a big release, a big reward when they get it. And this last one he does here is probably the best one he does. He starts to lock up a little bit in those shoulders on me, but he comes through pretty clean. And long loose rein, pet him. He goes long and low with his head. He's really relaxed. So we know that we're doing something good here. He's figuring it out. I'm not going to press the issue anymore. That's enough for today. And as a wrap up, I'm going to go ahead and work the rope a little bit, and I'm going to drag a log around here, and usually I will show my clients their horse dragging a log or at least handling the rope. Those clients that are going to use their horse on the ranch, they kind of like to see it their horses had the rope dropped off of them, because they may not go home and actually use that rope off that colt, But in the spring, when they go to calving and branding, they're probably going to drag a few calves off their colt, and so they need to know that their horse has seen the rope at least. And I've ridden a lot of colts after other trainers that they've had 30 rides, and they're coming to me for another 30, and that horse has never seen a rope before, and it's a little unnerving to me when I take a rope down off of them the first time. It's not the funnest experience when they spook at it, especially when I assume that they've had the rope handled off of them before. That is never fun. So I try not to assume that they've had the rope thrown off of them before or dropped down off of them, because that just sets you up for a big accident. So what I have found that helps me when I first start dragging something off a colt, now remember, by no means am I a roper, but it is a scary situation to me, because at any point they're going to scoot, grab their butt, take off running, or whatever, bucking, run off kind of deal, and I am not that good with the rope, so I usually have to drop the rope off of them, gather up my reins and everything. So what I like to do is start out with a straight line, and they just kind of get the feel of that rope against them at first. And then when I start to turn them like this, that's when they feel that rope come around their butt end. Now hopefully in your groundwork you've already done some ground driving, done some rope work. They have felt a rope come around them like that before, and they've experienced it, and you've seen their reaction to it, and you've desensitized them to that. And so walking him around in that circle like that is not going to be anything new to him, and he handled it just about as I expected. So I always like to stop them and do a turn on the forehand and ask them to back up right here. This is the exact maneuver that I need them to do when we're working in the branding pen. When they drag a calf out, they're going to stop and turn around and face up, and either they're going to hold the calf in the iron forks, or a wrestler is going to be on the ground pulling the rope off of the legs and holding the calf down for it to be worked by the ground crew. And I find that by having them do a turn on the forehand and moving their hip around allows them to hold that calf a lot better than asking them to do a turn on the haunches. It's just like when you watch a head horse in the roping. When they turn around to face up, they do a turn on the forehand when they turn around. And take a look at some of those top head horses. That's the maneuver they do to keep that rope tight and to be the most efficient in their turnaround as fast as they can. And he has not seen this flag since the second ride, I think it was, or the third ride. So we're going to do a brief review. And by holding it straight above their head, they can't see it. They can hear it, but they can't necessarily see it. So I'm always careful how I hold it at first. But I want him to understand that it's not going to get him. And this little spook he had here, it's no big deal. That's an honest mistake. Spooks are fine. It's what they do after they spook that I'm concerned about. It's never acceptable for them to turn it into a bucking runoff fit. It's okay to be scared. I always try to tell them it's okay to be scared. It's not okay to do some counterfeit action after they get scared. And I hope that makes sense. I've had too many horses that have run off with me in a bucking fit and just transplanted my butt on the ground when they have spooked. And now I really like how he's got a foot cocked and he's tolerating Charlie right here. That's a tremendous amount of patience and compliancy to deal with all of that drama going on. He's got an ear cock, he's aware of what's going on, but he's relaxed about it. He knows that this is just a game, this is just something else to do. It's really important to me also that they get accustomed to the flag work, because anytime they go anywhere to go to work, the ground crew will be using flags. And actually folks on horseback will be using flags as well. Anytime, whether they're branding, whether they're doing fall shots, whether they're sorting, flags will be used, and he needs to understand that it's not about him and it's about getting the cows worked. Alright, so that makes 20 rides. We got through it. This has been an incredibly long project, and I want to thank everybody who has stuck with it through this whole 20 rides and watched all the videos. And I hope that I was able to help some people that had some questions and had some problems and were running into some issues. And I hope you guys all see kind of what these Hancock Blue Valentine horses are all about, and this guy's a pretty darn good representative. I don't know that there's much anything else I could have done with him in 20 rides. He's ready to go be turned out, grow up a little bit more, and take a nice break for the rest of winter, and watch for him in the spring, because we're going to start probably calving and branding on him come April or so. So stick around. This guy's got a bright future ahead of him, and thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. There'll be a lot more stuff like this going on. Thanks for watching.